Well, thank you, choir, so very, very much for that very uplifting and inspiring anthem. Today, we come to a conclusion of our emphasis on living the love of Jesus and that theme, and we've looked at it over the last several weeks, and we've looked at how this theme applies in different areas. For example, the church, in our home, and in our world. But today, as we come to kind of a conclusion of this series, I'd like to focus on a principle. And this principle is one that applies in all three areas. It's the principle of speaking truth in love. I'd like to begin with a question this morning. What does it mean to grow up? What does it mean to be mature? Depending upon your age, your circumstances in life, you might get different responses to that. A teenager might define being mature or growing up in terms of physical activity, ability to get a driver's license, drive a car. Others might define it in terms of legal privileges to get married, to buy alcoholic beverages or something like that. But most would look at it, at least in some sense, of quality and stability and perspective on life. But it's so interesting that in Ephesians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul talks about this theme of maturity. In fact, he says in verse 14 that he no longer wants us to be infants. No longer to be infants, but rather he encourages each of us in our life, in our emotional life, in our relational life, in our spiritual journey, in some ways to grow up. We are to grow up into all of things. And he gives us a principle. What is the mark? What is the sign that we are really growing up spiritually and relationally and in terms of our ability to handle and process life? He says one of the key marks is the ability to speak truth in love. That is worth reflecting upon. That is a powerful, powerful concept, the merging together of truth in love and the understanding that our maturity, and as we will see here in just a little bit, the maturity and growth of others is somewhat dependent upon our ability to grow in this principle of being able to speak truth in love. In fact, I would go so far as to say that this whole theme of living the love of Jesus can be summed up as our experience with one another of speaking truth in love. I want us to consider these qualities. First of all, just individually, these qualities of truth and love. And kind of a pop quiz this morning. Which do you think is most important? Is it more important to be a person of truth? Or is it more important to be a person of love? Well, it's interesting. If we look at the Bible, we can find high praise for both. When we look at truth, Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." There's something about our ability to live in freedom, to live in wholeness, to live in a capacity to embrace life in a sense of reality and freedom that is connected to this ability to orient our life towards truth. Truth is not what we just make up. Truth is inherent in God's principles, God's precepts, God's laws, God's words. And we are to know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I remember in high school and going into college, being a young man who was seeking for something in life. I had not yet made my profession. Desperately seeking for something in life that would bring me meaning, and going into this Christian coffee shop on downtown Denver, a little coffee shop run by a group of young people, mostly from an Assembly of God church called the Freedom House. And I walked in there, and as I walked up, on the wall, across the wall in big bold letters was that saying, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." I thought, wow, What is all of that about? What does that really mean? But Jesus said, we will never have and find freedom in our life if we are not people of truth, who live in the power of truth. But then we can go on in the Bible and we can find so many verses that talk about the value of love. In fact, the most popular, well-known verse of the entire Bible, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever would believe in him would have eternal life. It's as we embrace God's love, we experience God's love. In the first epistle to John, the writer John spends an entire epistle talking about how love is the mark or the evidence of the Christian life, how we are to live in the spirit of love, and it's love that other people see and brings people and draws people to make their own profession of faith in Christ. I remember while in seminary and visiting with a young man from the country of Sikkim who came from a deeply ingrained Buddhist family. He had given his life to Christ and was now in Chicago studying to go back to his country and share the gospel. His name was Shatra Tamang. And we said, how did you end up from a Buddhist country, a Buddhist family, here studying the gospel at Trinity Seminary? He said, it was through my experience in college in London, where I came to know other Christian students, and I was overwhelmed by their love for one another, and I was so overwhelmed by their love for me. And they began to share with me how that was a love that they had found through embracing Jesus Christ, and I gave my life to Christ. So love and truth both are essential qualities in the Bible. They're both spoken of very highly. They both have high praise, and we are exhorted to embrace both of them. The problem is, oftentimes in our life, love and truth do not become merged. Sometimes we find it difficult to integrate in a practical way, to integrate in a relational way these great themes of truth and love. But I am convinced that it's when applying these truths of love and truth that we find power and freedom and growth in the Christian life. When we think about these principles of truth and love, a simple analysis will tell us that there are four combinations that are possible. First of all, there are some people who are dedicated to the truth, but they don't really have much sense of the quality of love. These are people for whom issues are very high, convictions and convictions to truth is very, very high, but their experience or their commitment to maintaining relationships is secondary. It's very, very, very low. I remember we had a professor in the seminary I attended in Chicago. He was a brilliant man. He had written, I think, 16 books, had 2 PhDs, lectured all over the world. I mean, his lectures were just amazing. He was a man who was committed to the principle of truth and finding truth and discovering truth and writing about truth. He was finally dismissed from the university. No one wanted to take his classes. He couldn't get along with other faculty members. He had trouble relating to people because while the principles of truth were very high, his commitment to love was very low, and his relationships were always in a strain. In fact, every experience I had of him in settings of coffee or informal discussion ended up in some kind of argument, some kind of debate. And when you came away from a discussion from him, sometimes you felt like, well, I learned something, but it wasn't very graceful. It's kind of like he made a point. He kind of ran over me like a Mack truck or something, you know. I mean, you were kind of beat up by listening to him make his point to you. So here was a man who was committed to truth, but the witness of his life really suffered, and the quality of his life and his profession and teaching really suffered because there was very little evidence that he really loved the students or loved his faculty peers or loved much of anybody for that matter. And then there are people who are committed to love, but they're kind of wishy-washy when it comes to the truth. These are people for whom relationships are very high. They value fellowship. They value being close to others and having people like them and showing that they like others. But they are people who will sacrifice truth, who will ignore sometimes truth or bringing up truth or sharing truth because they don't want anything to stand in the way of love. These are people who just tend to avoid conflict at all costs, and sometimes it really in the long run sort of damages their marriage because they let their partner kind of run over them or dominate the agenda. It sometimes damages their growth or ability to grow professionally in their occupation or in the workplace. And these are people who can't seem to take a stand on much of anything, but they want you to know that they care about you. I mean, they're good at that. They want you to know that they really are concerned about you and want to be in a relationship and fellowship with you. But being committed to love without truth, their love becomes kind of wishy-washy, kind of mushy and kind of fluffy, and it's very difficult for them to really work through any kind of issue or resolve any kind of problem or really just have a discussion about any kind of serious matter. And then there are some people, unfortunately, I don't know very many like this, although I read about them in the newspapers, on the internet, on TV. There are some people, they don't care about truth or love. And these are the people who we hear about in the news who are really what I think the Bible describes as evil. They don't care about the truth or standards or principles or laws or rules or really what is right or wrong. And they certainly don't care about the needs or the feelings of others. Everything's about them and their perspective and their agenda. These are people who just run over others. And sometimes you hear these stories and you think, how can anybody be like that? How can someone treat others like that? How can people cheat people like that? How can people do harm to others like that? These are people who have no commitment to either truth or love. But then it's when we find people, and it's not easy, it's sometimes a challenge and a struggle, who are marrying, who are merging in a kind of a dynamic tension, these principles of truth and love, that it says we are able to grow up and others are able to grow with us, because when we merge truth and love, then there's something that happens wonderfully within us as God enables us to grow, and there's something that happens to others that enables them to grow as well. And I think one of the primary examples of where this either succeeds or fails is in the arena of parenting. You know, if there's a parent who believes in truth but not love, then they're always chiding their child, always correcting their child, always getting on to their child, always trying to let their child know that they need to be doing something differently or better. But if it's a parent who is committed to love but without truth, then they're ignoring things. They're ignoring behaviors. They're, oh, honey, you know, I want you to feel good about yourself, and I want your self-esteem to be wonderful, and I want us to have a fun, happy family, but there's no sense of boundaries, no sense of expectations, no sense of teaching or training the child in the right manner of living or behaving or dealing with life, and love just gets lost there. But when there's a parenting style that's committed to both truth and love and can say to a child, I love you, I truly do, but the fact is I love you so much that I can't let you behave like that. I love you so much that I've got to set some boundaries. You can't just skip school and stay home and play games or watch TV. You've got to get on with being a responsible kind of person. It's important, and I love you, but because I love you so much, I want to help you be a growing person in terms of your responsibility and the way you treat others. When there's a kind of a commitment to sharing truth, but doing it in a capacity that lets them know, I'm not against you. I'm not just trying to give you a hard time. I'm not just trying to beat you up or be right. But it's because I care about you. I love you. And I want you to know I'm always going to be there for you. But I'm also always going to be there for you to help you become the person that I think you should be and that I think you want to be and that God wants you to be. You see, it's by merging these principles of truth and love that we are able to find significant growth both in ourselves and in others. And I think it's by merging these principles of truth and love that we truly, truly do live the love of Jesus. I mean, you look at the love of Jesus and the life of Jesus, it's just amazing. Remember the story of the woman caught in adultery? And everyone was giving her a hard time. In fact, they were about ready to stone her. And Jesus showed his love and compassion for her, and he said, okay. He said, let's just think about that. The one who is without sin, here, you cast the first stone. And they all kind of thought about that. And they thought, well, I'm not going to cast a stone because I'm not without sin. He helped them to see that we're all struggling in life. We're all sinners who are saved by grace. So he showed compassion on her by allowing her to see firsthand that others in the community had failed in their relationship with God as well. And it said they one by one all dropped their stones and went away. So did Jesus then say, well, see how much I care for you. See, I've got this mob, this crowd off of you, and just go do your own thing. Just live any way you want to. He said, no, go and do not sin anymore. He charged her or exhorted her to a better life, to a more responsible life, to a more truth-filled life, but he did it in the spirit of compassion and love. Remember the woman at Samaria? And it said she had had several husbands, and the one she was living with now was not even her own. But Jesus engages her by saying, how would you like to have some living water? I'd like to share with you some water that can flow up from out of your innermost being, that will well up even with you a sense of renewal and vitality and inner life. And she knew this man must love me, because here he is talking to a Samaritan woman, who had been outcast from her community in the middle of the day. She had to be thinking, this man really cares about me. He's approached me and entered into this conversation. Now he's offering to give me water, both physically and spiritually. But in that context of his love and commitment to embrace her and to encourage her, he's not afraid to say, go get your husband. And she says, well, I don't have a husband. He says, well, that's the truth. In fact, you've had, I forget, what was the number, 5 husbands? I forget really what it was. And he says, the person you're with now is not even your own. And she said, oh, this man must be a prophet. He wasn't afraid to have that hard conversation that would challenge her to examine her life and to change her life and to move into a new way of living. But he did so in the context of, I'm here to help you find living water. I'm here to help you find a new way of life. I'll close with this story. I've shared it before, but it's such an impacting story for me. When I was in seminary, and I think I was in my second year, and I'd already gone through the trauma of the first year of being lonely and afraid and away from home and all of that. But I was living in a dorm, and there was a young man who came very first semester there, away from home for the first time, and he was really struggling. And I know this is going to be a shock to you, but a seminary dorm is not like a monastery. There are times when we're playing frisbee football up and down the halls. There's time when we're watching the football game on the TV in the lounge and just going crazy, shouting for our home team and just really having a kind of a fun time. And this used to drive this young man crazy. And he would get to a point to where he would come out of his room, usually after he was cloistered in there for some time studying, and come out and just jump on us and say, you all are making too much noise. I can't study in here. You've got to stop this. And what he was really doing was alienating himself from everybody. He had no friends. See him walking across campus, always by himself. Come into the dorm never hanging out with others, watching TV or talking, always in his room, just alienating himself from others. And all his efforts to try to change all of our behaviors was just making everybody mad at him. So I prayed about it. I prayed a lot about it. And one day I went and knocked on his door and said, "Steve, I'd like to visit with you just for a minute." And he said, "Well, come on in." And I said, "You seem like a really neat guy and a guy that God is really using and has called you here and a person that we would really like to get to know. The problem is nobody really knows you because you stay in your room all the time and you don't interact with anybody. You don't get involved in any of the activities or fellowship, and you come out, and when you come out to talk to us, you're mad and carrying on." And I said, "The fact of the matter is there is a library. If you want to go and have total quiet, we don't play football in the library. There's a library where you can go to study, but," I said, "in the dorm and in other places of the seminary, I think it would really be helpful to you and helpful to us if you would enter a little bit into the fellowship and find the common struggle here we have in the seminary." And he thought about that, and he said, "Well, thank you," and I left, and I didn't know what his response was going to be. Well, the next year, Christy and I got married, and we had our own apartment, and it was my third year, and I was graduating. And the spring of my graduation, I was walking across the campus. I was just about 2 weeks out from graduation, and I heard a voice, "Alan, Alan." And I looked over, and it was this young man. It was a Steve, and he was running across the campus. I said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I wanted to visit with you a minute." He said, "I understand you're graduating." And I said, "Well, yes, I am. And I'm going back to be a Methodist in Oklahoma and be moving and whatnot." And he said, "Well, I just wanted to tell you something." He said, "My first semester here, when we were living in the dorm there together," he said, "that was really a difficult time." I said, "Well, it is for everybody, Steve." And he said, "That was a really difficult time for me." But he said, "I've really enjoyed my studies here at Trinity. The professors have been wonderful. The administration's been so helpful. It's been a very growing experience." But he said, "I have to let you know that nothing has impacted my life in a more positive way and helped me grow in a more in-depth way than the day that you knocked on my door and came in and lovingly told me that I needed to spend some time connecting with and getting to know and making friends and entering into the fellowship of this seminary." He said, "I was on the verge of dropping out at the end of that semester. But," he said, "when you came to talk to me, I started reaching out and taking that to heart. And your words to me literally saved my career here at Trinity. And I want to thank you so much." I was blown away by that. But I was also blown away by the thought that it was because, at least on that occasion, and I can just assure you it has not gone perfectly well for me in every other circumstance of life and ministry. But at least on that occasion, I prayed about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about what would it mean to marriage, truth, and love, and have a visit with Steve. And it was a growing experience for me, and it was an incredibly growing experience for him. And it helped me see firsthand what Paul was talking about, the power of growth in the Christian life when we're able to embrace the principles of truth and love. And so I would just leave with you simply this thought this morning. Maybe it's time for us as individuals, maybe it's time in our families, in our communities. Again, I think this goes to kind of every area we've looked at. Perhaps it's time for us in the church to grow up with one another, to grow up together, and to begin to live like Jesus did, this love of Jesus in a balanced, healthy, holistic way, as we learn how to share with one another in the spirit of truth merged with love. Thanks be to God. Amen.